Imagine being 12 years old, you're dressed in white, your hair arranged with a spear point. Outside, you hear the crowd gathering, hundreds of strangers waiting to watch what happens next. Your mother is crying, but you don't know why yet. The man you met once last month is walking toward you, and everyone is smiling like this is normal. In a few hours, you'll understand why she's crying. In a few hours, you'll be carried through the streets while strangers scream obscenities at you. And when you finally arrive at a house you've never seen before, the worst part of the night will begin in the most public room of the home, where everyone can hear what happens next. This isn't fiction. This was a Roman wedding night, and what I'm about to tell you is so disturbing that Rome itself tried to erase it from history. The rituals I'm going to describe were documented by Roman writers, condemned by early Christians, and then mysteriously forgotten, buried, as if an entire civilization collectively decided some traditions were too dark to remember. By the end of this video, you'll understand why modern historians call it state-sanctioned trauma. You'll know about the god whose shrine required one final act of submission, and you'll never look at ancient Rome the same way again. But I need to warn you, this gets significantly darker than you might expect. Let's start with a fact that should make you pause. Under Roman law, a girl could be legally married at 12 years old. Not 16, not 14, 12. The age when most modern children are in 6th grade. But here's what makes it worse. This wasn't some edge case. This wasn't rare. Skeletal evidence from Roman burial sites shows that many girls were married and became mothers between 12 and 15 years old. One study of epitaphs from Rome found that the median age of first marriage for elite women was around 14. For lower classes, it could be even younger. Think about that for a moment. While we're talking about the glory of Rome, its engineering marvels, its philosophy and law, we're also talking about a society that systematically married off children to adult men. And the men? The grooms were typically in their late 20s or early 30s, sometimes older. The age gap wasn't just large, it was designed to be large. It was a feature, not a bug, because it ensured maximum power imbalance. Roman jurists loved to talk about consensus, the idea that marriage required agreement from both parties. They wrote elaborate legal texts about how both the bride and groom had to consent. It sounds progressive, doesn't it? It sounds almost modern, but let's examine what consent actually meant in practice. Picture this. You're 13 years old. Your father is the pater familias, the head of the family. Under Roman law, his power over you is almost absolute. He controls your property, your legal status, your entire future. He has the right of patria potestas, paternal power, which in early Rome even included the right to execute his own children for disobedience. Now this man, whose word is quite literally law in your household, tells you that you will marry a 30-year-old stranger he's selected, a man who will advance his political alliances, a man who will merge land holdings or settle a debt, a man you might have met once, briefly in a formal setting. Do you say no? Can you say no? This is what Roman consent looked like. It was technically required by law, but it existed within a system so fundamentally coercive that the word itself becomes almost meaningless. The earliest form of Roman marriage was called cum manu, literally with hand meaning under control. And the legal language around it is chilling because it describes the marriage using the same terminology used for property transfer. The bride passed from her father's manus to her husband's manus. She went from being under one man's legal control to being under another's. She wasn't technically a slave. Roman law was very clear about that distinction, but the language of ownership was everywhere. In this arrangement, any property she inherited didn't become hers. It became her husband's. If she had money, it was now his money. If she received gifts, they were his gifts. Legally, she was absorbed into his family as if her original family had never existed. Now, it's true that by the late Republic and into the Empire, a different form called sine manu became more common, giving women more independence. But we're going to focus on that earlier, darker period, because those rituals, those traditions, they cast a shadow that lasted for centuries. And some of them never really went away. On the day before her wedding, the bride underwent a transformation ritual that was deeply symbolic, and when you understand the symbolism, deeply disturbing. Her hair was parted using the point of a spear, not a comb, not a decorative pin. A spear, specifically a spear that had been used to kill a gladiator. Let that sink in. The tool of violence, still carrying the memory of death, was used to prepare her for marriage. Why? Ancient sources say it was for luck, for fertility, for protection, but the message is hard to miss. Marriage, like war, was about conquest, about one party yielding to another, about power. Her hair was then arranged into 6 braids. The sex crines, a style apparently worn by the ancient Vestal virgins. She wore a white tunic, the tunica recta, woven in an ancient style. Everything about her appearance was designed to mark her as liminal, caught between girlhood and wifehood, between her father's house and her husband's, between her old identity and her new one. And around her waist was tied the Knot of Hercules, a special knot that only her husband was permitted to untie. On their wedding night, in their wedding bed, the symbolism was explicit. Her body was locked, and he held the key. When evening came, the most public part of the ceremony began, the deductio in domum, the procession to the groom's house. And this is where Roman wedding ritual stops looking ceremonial and starts looking like a reenactment of violence. Because this procession was deliberately designed to echo one of Rome's founding myths, the rape of the Sabine women. You probably know this story. According to legend, early Rome had a shortage of women. So Romulus, Rome's founder, invited the neighbouring Sabines to a festival. And then Roman men violently abducted the Sabine women and forced them into marriage. It's one of Rome's most famous stories, depicted in countless paintings and sculptures. But here's what's disturbing. Romans didn't just tell this story as a dark chapter from their past. They celebrated it. They reenacted it at every elite wedding. Ancient writers describe the wedding procession using language that makes it sound like an abduction. The groom would seize his bride. In some accounts, he would literally tear her from her mother's arms in a mock struggle. The bride was expected to display pudor, a word that means modesty, shame, or reluctance. She was supposed to resist, to seem afraid, to cry. Now, imagine you're that 13-year-old girl. You've been told your whole life that this is normal, that this is what good girls do. So you perform the resistance that's expected of you. You pull away from your mother. You hesitate at the door. You make the appropriate show of fear. But here's the question that should haunt us. When does performed fear become real fear? When does ritual terror become actual terror? At what point does the performance merge with reality? For many of these girls, we have to assume the fear was completely genuine. They were children being handed over to strange men in a public ceremony designed to symbolize their loss of autonomy. The performance and the reality were the same thing. As the procession wound through the streets of Rome, something happened that sounds almost surreal. Crowds would gather to watch, and they didn't just watch silently. They participated. They sang what were called fescennine verses, songs that ancient writers describe as obscene, vulgar, and often cruel. These weren't gentle blessings for a happy marriage. They were graphic sexual jokes, insults, crude predictions about the wedding night. Roman writers claimed this tradition served an important function. The obscenity was meant to ward off evil spirits who might be drawn by the couple's good fortune. Jealous gods needed to be distracted by vulgarity. But let's think about this from the bride's perspective. You're being marched through the streets of Rome, torn from your mother's arms, surrounded by strangers who are shouting sexual comments about what's going to happen to you in a few hours. You're 12, maybe 13, maybe 14 years old. This wasn't just a party. This was a psychological gauntlet designed to break down your old identity and prepare you for submission. Every element, the mock kidnapping, the expected fear, the public obscenity, was reinforcing the same message. Your will, your autonomy, your selfhood no longer mattered. The procession happened at night, lit by torches. This wasn't for practical reasons. It was symbolic. The torch was another echo of the Sabine rape myth. When the Romans abducted the Sabine women, it happened at a festival, at night, by torchlight. So as the bride was led through the streets, the flickering flames would cast shadows on the crowd, on their faces as they shouted and laughed. The bride would be surrounded by fire and noise and jeering strangers, all of it designed to overwhelm her senses, to mark this as a rupture, a point of no return. One Roman poet described it as a night when shame flees and modesty is overcome. The language is telling. The goal wasn't to celebrate the bride's happiness. It was to break her modesty, to overcome her shame, to prepare her for what came next. And what came next happened in the most public room of her new home. When the procession finally reached the groom's house, there was another ritual that sounds almost romantic until you understand what it meant. The bride was forbidden from stepping over the threshold herself. To trip or stumble would be a terrible omen, so she had to be carried over it, lifted by attendants or slaves, and brought into the house. Ancient sources explain this as a practical measure to avoid bad luck. They say it was about appeasing household spirits, about starting the marriage on the right foot. And maybe that's all it was, but there's another way to read this ritual. The bride did not enter her new life on her own 2 feet. She did not walk into this house by her own power. She was brought in, carried, passive. From the very first moment, the message was clear. This is not your house. You are not here by your own choice or your own movement. You are here because you have been brought here. Once inside, standing in the atrium, the grand public heart of the Roman home, the bride would perform one of the most famous rituals of Roman marriage. She would recite the words, Ubi tu Gaius, ego Gaia. Where you are, Gaius, I am Gaia. Now, neither of them was probably actually named Gaius or Gaia. These were just generic names, like saying John and Jane. But the meaning of the phrase is what matters. It wasn't I will follow you, or I will support you, or even I will obey you. It was more fundamental than that. It was, where you are, I am. Your location defines my location. Your identity subsumes my identity. Modern scholars debate how common this phrase actually was. Some think it might have been more of an ideal that writers described rather than something every bride actually said. But the fact that it was held up as the ideal tells us everything we need to know about what Roman marriage was supposed to be. The bride was declaring that she no longer existed as a separate entity. She was now an extension of her husband. Where he was, she was. What he was, she was. It was the death of one identity and the birth of another. But unlike a natural death, this one was public, ritualized, and forced. Now we need to talk about the space where all of this happened, the atrium. In a Roman house, the atrium wasn't a private space. It was the most public room in the entire home. It's where the family greeted guests, where business was conducted, where the family displayed their wealth and status.